Rhino, what you're thinking? Not another viced Rhino response. Haven't you gored this guy's arguments already? Why are you charging so hard after this guy? And other lame related Rhino puns. In my past couple of videos, I've been pointing out where viced Rhino got some basic facts wrong in his response video to Deflate regarding the Gospels. But today I'm going to switch gears. I'll agree with him on some points, and then of course disagree on some others. For starters, viced Rhino is going to talk about the witness from some non-Christian historians like Josephus and Tacitus.
Unless he brings up something new, the only corroboration that I'm aware of is that there are non-biblical documents that talk about the things that the early Christians believed without actually confirming them. Well, that and the Josephus passage that pretty much every relevant scholar, Christian or otherwise, agrees is forgery, with the only argument being about just how much of it is a forgery.
Actually, Rhino has a really good point here.
No, he's got a point.
Even if we assume for a moment that the Testimonium Flavianum is partly or completely accurate in its portrayal of Jesus, and I doubt that it is completely accurate, there's a big problem. Josephus wasn't around during Jesus' time. He was born a few years after Jesus died and wrote his work Antiquities, roughly 60 years after Jesus' crucifixion. This means he couldn't have been an eyewitness to Jesus' life and deeds. Instead, it's very likely that he got his information about Jesus from Christian communities in his time. The Testimonium at best only confirms what Christians in the first century believed about Jesus, but here's the thing. We already have a much more detailed account of those beliefs in the New Testament. So the Testimonium doesn't really add any new information. Now, some might argue that Josephus, by not disputing Jesus' existence or any opposing views, indirectly supports Jesus' historicity. But that's a shaky argument because silence doesn't always equal agreement. It's entirely possible that Josephus just wasn't at all interested in Jesus. This is evident from the fact that he dedicates only a brief paragraph to Jesus and provides just a broad overview of his ministry. And here's the clincher. Even if Josephus does confirm that Jesus existed, most historians believe that the New Testament itself is a solid enough source to establish the historical existence of Jesus. After all, the New Testament authors were much closer to the events in question. So in the grand scheme of things, I totally agree that the Testimonium Flavianum doesn't really amount to much evidence for the historical Jesus.
I'm curious how a 2nd century document would corroborate details about Jesus' life, given that Jesus would have died some 70 years before the 2nd century. But anyhow, to quote Professor of New Testament Studies Robert Van Voorst, Tacitus gives the strongest evidence outside the New Testament for the death of Jesus. His brief mention of Christ may fairly be claimed to corroborate some key elements of the New Testament account. Does this Testimonium Tacitium therefore provide definitive evidence of the existence of Jesus? If we could be certain that Tacitus' account was based on non-Christian sources, the answer would be yes, but as we have seen, such independent knowledge is unverifiable. As R.T. France concludes, while the evidence from Tacitus corroborates the New Testament accounts of the death of Jesus, by itself it cannot prove that the events happened as Tacitus had been informed, or even the existence of Jesus. So, yeah, Tacitus, according to this scholar, is the best that there is as far as extra-biblical gospel confirmation goes. And at best, from Tacitus, we get that Jesus was executed. And we're even left wondering if he got that through any sort of official channels, or if he was just repeating what he had heard from other Christians. And ultimately, if he's just writing down stuff that he got from Christian sources, can we really say that this is non-Christian confirmation of the events?
I gotta say, Rhino isn't wrong here either. So, when we talk about Tacitus and his account of the fire in Rome, where Nero blamed the Christians, there's a little nugget of information about Jesus. He's only referred to as Christus in this passage, and it tells us a bit about him. Now, the big question is where Tacitus got his information about Jesus, and whether he had some secret source of facts. But as Rhino rightly points out, Tacitus was writing about 85 years after Jesus passed away, so it's likely that he wasn't conducting his own investigation into Jesus. He probably heard about him through hearsay. Now, there's a theory that Tacitus might have heard this information about Jesus from his friend Pliny the Younger, who did have some dealings with Christians, but again, it's just tough to say for sure. The bottom line is there isn't enough strong evidence to prove Tacitus had independent access to information about Jesus, so his testimony isn't all that powerful in making a case for the historical Jesus, as was in the case of Josephus. In the end, these arguments from Tacitus and Josephus just don't really move the needle a whole lot when it comes to establishing the historical credibility of the New Testament or the historical Jesus. We can't really expect a Jewish and a Roman historian to show a whole lot of interest in Jesus in the first place. In my view, the best kind of external corroboration that we're going to get for the New Testament is in incidental passing remarks that the New Testament writers make that we can cross-check with non-Christian sources. The more obscure and the more casual the mention, the better. And the New Testament writers make a lot of them. Speaking of which, here is Vice Rhino leading with his chin.
In the same vein, Mark depicts Jesus making a journey from Tyre to the Sea of Galilee by way of Sidon and then through the midst of the Decapolis. If you're unfamiliar with the area, that might not raise any red flags, but if you look at it on the map, that would mean that Jesus first went north from Tyre before going around in a wide spiral in order to approach the Sea of Galilee from the south. Now, sure, you can make up reasons for why Jesus would have made such a weird detour, but no such reasons are actually given in the Bible, so they amount to nothing more than speculation.
And here's philosopher Tim McGrew coming off the top ropes.
All right, let's talk about faulty geography. This is a claim that's been made that in Mark 7:31, the author of the second gospel, whom I will just refer to as Mark, makes a geographical error and thereby betrays his lack of knowledge of Palestine. So here's the claim. It's just a stray bit of Jesus' itinerary, right? A very boring thing. You have never heard a sermon preached on Mark 7:31. Then he, Jesus, returned from the region of Tyre and went through Sidon to the Sea of Galilee in the region of the Decapolis. Hard to find inspiring words to say about that little bit of Jesus' travel itinerary. But there's an interesting problem. Here's the problem. If we glance at a map, you see that Tyre is here, Sidon is here, and the region of the Decapolis is down here. Now, if you were going to go from Tyre to the region of the Decapolis, why wouldn't you go straight down to the Decapolis? Why would you go north to go south? I suppose we could say, well, maybe Jesus had some reason he wanted to go to Sidon. But you know, and I know, what the New Testament critics would say if you made such a lame shift at an explanation. Oh, you're just going to do anything to harmonize this and to make it come out right. Come on, be a serious scholar. Admit that Mark just doesn't know what he's talking about. And in fact, many commentators have said just that. So here's from a commentary about a decade ago, Adam Wynne, The Purpose of Mark's Gospel. Many interpreters have noted this awkward route as evidence that Mark was unfamiliar with the geography of Palestine and Galilee. It seems difficult to believe that a person living in Galilee who is educated enough to produce such a gospel as Mark would be unfamiliar with a geographical relationship between Tyre and Sidon. I love it when modern biblical critics lead with their chin. This is a boxing term. These people sitting at their library tables in Tübingen, which are nice and flat, and rolling out their nice flat maps and tracing lines in 2 dimensions. Let's go beyond that, shall we? Here's a topographical map of Palestine. Here's Tyre. Here's Sidon. Oh, what's this orange stuff in here? 1208. That's meters. Okay. And what's this? Well, this is right down here by the Sea of Kinneret, or of Galilee. This is a negative 210. That's 210 meters below sea level. The Sea of Galilee is the world's lowest freshwater lake. How many of you have done any climbing around in mountains? Anybody like to do some hiking? Right. So let me tell you what it's like, and stop me when I get it wrong. You start at the base of the mountain, and you look up at a point at the top, and you say, that's where I want to go. And then you just march straight up the mountain, up to the top, and then right over, right? Is that how it works? Yeah, right, 9. Not how it works. Any serious rough terrain, you're going to be doing switchbacks. You'll come to a thicket that you've got to go around. It's very hard to ascend a mountain that doesn't have a nice paved road going right over the crown, right? Sorry, the orange, where am I going? I'm going here, yeah. The orange region, here, that seems to thin out right about there, and then it gets really severe as we go to the Golan Heights and stuff up in this region. But there's this little region right here where we're coming over to the Jordan River. Oh, that's an elevation of just 70 meters. And what's the elevation here at the coastline? It is sea level. 0 is the elevation at sea level, right? So to go from from 0 to 70 doesn't seem too bad. If you go up here around the shoulder of this mountain, plus you'll notice there's a little rivulet coming in here. You'll have some water. That rivulet is running to the sea, of course, not back from it. So you'll have fresh water all the way down the Jordan River Valley till you reach your destination. And if you've done much hiking in an arid climate, you'll understand that water actually matters. This is just a picture of Mount Meron today. Notice the northern shoulder of it dropping down to present a much less formidable obstacle for those who want to cross it. No further comment seems necessary. I think Mark actually knew the geography of Palestine. Thank you.
Given our knowledge of Palestinian topography, I think this one is just a little bit better than baseless speculation. But here's one more example that I think makes a whole lot of sense if the Gospels really are based on eyewitness testimony. In Mark chapter 6, there's a recount of the death of John the Baptist. It all goes down when Herodias' daughter, after dancing at a banquet for Herod's guests, asks for anything that she wants. What does she go for? Well, you guys know the story. It's John the Baptist's head. Now, according to Mark 6:27-28, we read, "And immediately the king sent an executioner with orders to bring John's head. He went and beheaded him in the prison and brought his head on a platter and gave it to the girl, and the girl gave it to her mother." What's interesting here is the Greek word used for executioner in verse 27. It's speculator, not the usual term used for a civil executioner, which is vimios. Speculator was a military officer, sort of like a scout or a courier. These guys even served as bodyguards for the Roman emperor. Every now and then, they had to do the dirty work of an executioner, although that wasn't their main job. Now, this choice of using the word speculator rather than vimios to carry out the execution lines up perfectly with what Josephus said about the same event. According to Josephus, John the Baptist was, quote, sent a prisoner out of Herod's suspicious temper to Machaerus, the castle I previously mentioned, and it was there that he was put to death. So here's the kicker. Herod Antipas wasn't hanging at his palace in Galilee at the time. He was off on a military campaign against his former father-in-law, Aretas IV, who was the king of the Nabateans. Herod was holed up at his military stronghold called Machaerus. All of this adds up to why they used a military officer instead of a regular executioner to kill John the Baptist. This gives us extra evidence to back up the idea that the Gospels are rooted in eyewitness testimony. Now, I can give dozens and dozens of examples just like these. Just see some of my other videos. So how does Vice Rhino respond to evidence like this in the Gospels? Well, you guessed it. He takes a page right out of the skeptic's playbook and cries Spider-Man fallacy.
Now, let's talk about archaeological discoveries. John's Gospel describes Jesus healing a man whom he met at the pool of Bethesda, located in the vicinities of Jerusalem. John specifically mentions that the pool was surrounded by 5 porticos. For a long time, there was no archaeological evidence of such a pool outside of Jerusalem, which was part of the reason why the reliability of John's Gospel was questioned. However, archaeologists have since dug out the pool and its 5 porticos, which means that John got it right.
Okay, great. The author of John knew about a pool, and a pool that could potentially be the pool that he described was found. We're still in Spider-Man territory, though. That is, to say that the Gospel of John is reliable history because he described a pool that actually existed is akin to saying that Spider-Man comics are reliable history because they accurately describe New York City.
Now, I've tackled this issue many times, but Vice Rhino has hit a real epistemological snag here. If we're saying that making mistakes is evidence against the Gospels, just as Rhino claims, then getting things right should be considered as evidence in their favor. It's a two-way street when it comes to evidence. And as we've seen so far, Rhino's been a bit careless in accusing the Gospel writers of getting things wrong. Here's the deal. The Gospel writers claim that they're presenting facts and being historical. The concept of realistic historical fiction didn't exist for many centuries after the time. So the Spider-Man comparison is a meme that needs to die. And when we take a look at the non-canonical or apocryphal Gospels, they don't get dozens of tricky facts correct in their narratives. Remember, the folks who wrote the Gospels didn't have the luxury of a quick Google search or Wikipedia to fact check. They didn't have access to modern libraries either. So it's pretty remarkable that they got so many things right. How do we best explain this? If the Gospel writers demonstrate themselves to be trustworthy, honest, and closely connected to the facts, then what this does is it provides us with compelling reasons to believe that the claims they made in the Gospels, at the very least, originate from the accounts of eyewitnesses. This, in turn, prompts us to consider what these witnesses claimed and why they did so in the face of a hostile audience. While Rhino did land a few good punches against Lucas, I think overall he failed to deflate his overall message regarding the reliability of the Gospels Lame pun once again intended. And as for the green grass coincidence, I did do an entire response video to Apologia, so be sure to check that out on the end screen. Anyways, I hope you found this video series helpful, and thank you again so much for watching.